this is Roy Doyle with the Arkansas Showcase Radio.com show, and we're bringing you another super interview. Today we're doing Humble Pie. And if you never heard of Humble Pie was the first super band of rock and roll. And Rolling Stone actually labeled it the first band to ever be called hard rock. So it had Peter Frampton, the great voice of Steve Marriott, and the fantastic drumming of Jerry Shirley, who we're doing the interview with. So stay tuned, and coming up right after this, it's Humble Pie. And Humble Pie is just one of the great groups of rock and roll. It's a historic little event that you're seeing here. So enjoy Jerry Shirley. He's a great guy, very, very funny with Humble Pie. And coming up right after this intro, Jerry Shirley, Humble Pie, Arkansas Showcase Radio.com interview. And that's it for right now. Coming up right after this, stay tuned. Jerry Shirley, woo, here we go. This is going to be awesome.
Hang on, meeting in progress is being recorded.
It's being recorded now, Jerry. You're on the page now, boy.
Is this going to be broadcast as in visually, or is it just verbally?
No, it's going to be visual. Our show has about 80 to 100,000 people a day tuning in. So wow. There's a lot of people tuned into it.
And it's visual as well as audio?
Yes, sir.
Wow, that's brilliant. Because some of these that I've done, they do it, through Zoom, but they use the audio only. It varies from show to show, I suppose.
Yeah, some people, they want us to use the audio because they said they don't want to see their faces. They said they didn't age well.
Well, no, hey, I'm 73. I know. I mean, I look all of 73.
No, you look well. You look really well.
Yeah. Well, we must be of a similar age group, I suppose. We're a bit younger than me. Well, where are you at?
I'm about 67.
There you go. Yeah.
But man, I tell you, I've been reading up on Humble Pie, and you're amazing, man. I mean, you started like when you was like 9. I think you started professionally at what, 11?
Yeah, 11/12, I think, was the first paid gig I did for a local college band. And I started playing when I was 9. And then my brother who was 2 years, may he rest in peace, he was 2 years older than me, was in a band locally. Just when everybody, that's all there was either football or soccer, or playing in a little amateur beat group, as they were called then, So I was playing with my brother's outfit. All we ever did was rehearse. We never did gigs. So anyway, they heard this college band who were working all the time and making good money, had heard about this drummer called Jerry Shirley and how he could play and everything. But I didn't tell them I was 12 years old. So they came to see me at my house, at my parents' house, and I'm kicking a football around in the backyard, just got back from school in my short trousers, and they said, "Is Jerry Shirley live here?" I said, "Yeah, you're looking at him." They almost fainted. But they gave me an audition, and I passed the audition and got the job. And it didn't last very long. I think it was all because they were all going off to university. That's what it was. They had formed in college pre-university, so they were 18-year-olds, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, it must have been about 6 months on and off, but there was 1 week, I'll never forget it, where my mum and dad, well, we weren't rich, but we were, I suppose you'd call middle class. She was a teacher. He was general manager, a sales manager of mechanical handling firm. So, we were okay. And one week I actually made more money at 12 years old than the two parents combined.
Oh, wow.
And so they said,
They said, quit school.
well, they said, they never did get in my way anyway. They knew that's all I ever wanted to do back then was play drums. I was hopeless scholastically. I just didn't care about it. I just was sidetracked by drumming. And the band was called the Keytones, and I inherited their previous drummer's shirt and tie. And the shirt was shiny satin, I suppose, bright electric blue, and a silver tie, and it stunk to high heaven because he'd been playing in it and sweating his butt off, and it hadn't been washed, and it had got his body odor on it. And my mum made it fit me by tucking the shoulders in up here, so that the arms that were this long were. It was interesting stuff.
So how did you move from that to Steve Marriott, Peter Frampton, and Humble Pie?
Well, there's a few years in between, of course. Not that many now, looking back, because at our age, 3 or 4 years goes a snip. You wake up and it's 3-4 years later. Back then, that was a long time.
Oh, yeah.
If you see what I mean. And so after that, and my brother and I started to putting the band together seriously, and we started to get some local gigs, and then the Small Faces came on television, and just about a month before, or maybe even less, I saw them for the first time. I bought, or my dad had helped me buy, a little kit of silver glitter Ludwig, beautiful drum kit. I wish I still had it. I used it in the beginning of Humble Pie and everything. But anyway, this band comes on called the Small Faces. We look like them. We've got the same equipment as they've got, but we're not anywhere near as talented. We didn't have a singer that could sing like Steve, but Kenny's drumming and my drumming was very similar. And we weren't that far apart in age. Ken's only, I think, 3 years older than me. So when the Small Faces came out, he was still only 16 or 17, I think, much the same as I was when Humble Pie came out. But anyway, our band got booked in to support them at a local gig. There was a hall in a town close to where we lived that was the local venue for all the big rock bands. The Who had played there, Spencer Davis, the Animals, the Nashville Teens, and the Small Faces. And we got to open up for them. In fact, we'd opened up for the Who a number of times. Anyway, my dad, being the wonderful man that he was, went in to see the Small Faces and introduced himself and said, "Look, my boys are in the band before you there, and they love your band." And he asked Kenny, he said, "My son, the drummer, thinks you're great." He said it would mean the world to him if you'd check him out and give him and me your opinion. Mm-hmm. I think he might have bribed him. I think he might have given him a couple of quid. He certainly bought him a drink or two. I don't know. But anyway, so I'm a big Small Faces fan. Our band were called the Little People. So, and I'm playing away, and I look over between the wings, and there's Kenny Jones going like this.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I thought, wow. And then I look back a couple of minutes later, and he's got Steve Marriott with him going like this. So when we finished, they came up to me and said, well, you're a great little player. Maybe if one day, if Kenny ever gets sick, you could be his stand-in. Couldn't believe it. What's weird about this is I had dreamt that this had happened before. Wow. No, and I'm not making that up. That's really, this happened. Now, I don't know whether my dad said something to them about that, and so they made it like this special moment, and they were probably both speeding at the time too, because that was
it's Steve Marriott, I know.
That's what mods did. They didn't. It wasn't big drinking culture. It was speed and a bit of booze, I suppose. Anyway, but so that led to Steve. We bumped into him in a music store on Shaftesbury Avenue, and our keyboard player had the gumption to say to him, I was too shy, the singer keyboard player said, Steve, could you produce a record for us? Can we do one of your songs? And amazingly, Steve said, yeah, why not? Wrote his number down and said, here, give us a call and come down and talk about it. And it went on from there. So, I did some sessions for him. We did a song by the Small Faces called, and our band was signed to Immediate Records for a single. And this was a band called Apostolic Intervention.
That nobody could pronounce.
We couldn't call it Little People, that would be too. And Andrew Oldham changed the name to that. Steve wanted to call us the Nice, because that was everything. It was like, oh, cool, man. Instead of that, you say, oh, nice, man. It was a sort of a pre-hippie thing to say. And Andrew said, oh, no, it's got to be Apostolic Intervention. And then a week later, he turned around and named Pat Arnold's band, P.P. Arnold's band, The Nice. And they had a big hit record with Keith Emerson, was an instrumental version of America. So anyway, we were signed to Immediate, and one thing led to another, and we just became friends. Buddies. We'd go out and hang out with Steve every now and then. If you needed a band or a drummer and a bass player, or just a drummer to go out and do a session because Ken wasn't available, he'd call me. So that's me at 14, 15 years old.
Holy cow.
Doing sessions at Olympic.
So when officially were you actually Humble Pie?
When were we?
When were you officially Humble Pie?
Okay, that was New Year's Eve, 1968, going into 69. Steve did something that wasn't very nice at all, but he'd had enough of the Small Faces. He couldn't handle what it had. It was very weird because they just had their biggest album success in England, but they were losing their way live, and Steve wasn't happy. And they had this gig on New Year's Eve that was a nightmare, and he stormed off stage and said, I quit. That's it. I've had enough. I wasn't there, and I just was told about it later, but first thing he did after that was that very night, was call Peter Frampton and myself, because he'd introduced us, because Peter was trying to put a band of his own together. He'd left the Herd. He'd recruited me, and the two of us were trying to put a band together, and we needed a guitar player, singer, or keyboard player, singer, and a bass player. So Steve calls up and says, "Can I join your band?"
Oh, wow.
And that was, big stuff. And my first reaction, and so was Peter, but Pete never admits to it, he's too nice a guy, was we both said to him, you can't leave the Small Faces because they were our favourite band. But Steve was the kind of guy, once he'd made up his mind, that was it. So after we'd realised, each one of us, that there was no change in his mind, we were very thrilled at the idea of him joining the band we were trying to put together, especially because he said, by the way, I've got a bass player who wants to come and join in, called Greg Ridley from Spooky Tooth, who happened to be my favourite bass player. So as a drummer, that was the even bigger hook for me, or as big a hook. It was big enough that Steve wanted to be in the band, but to have a bass player like Greg was fantastic. And within a week, we decided to have a play, a little rehearsal jam, call it what you will, in secret, because they were all very well known and you couldn't just go anywhere. So we did it in my parents' living room. And I can tell you, I remember the song we did, how it sounded, everything to this day. It was a song from Big Pink, the band's album Big Pink, called We Can Talk About It Now. And we had it down in minutes. It took us no time at all. The vocals, the backing, everything. And it was just right in the pocket. And Greg and I clicked as a rhythm section immediately. And the three of them singing together sounded magnificent. And this was all with tiny amps and my drum kit acoustically, and them singing acoustically without any PA, just in my living room.
Yeah.
And that was a week into, the first week of January 1969.
So once Humble Pie really started catching on and you started receiving success with it, you were called the first super band, and Rolling Stone actually called you hard rock.
Yeah.
But you were the first band to be called hard rock, but they didn't mean it in a nice way.
No, they didn't. And I think they also used the term heavy metal.
Yeah.
Which was even more insulting.
But see, now it's a good thing.
Yeah, but then it was like, why? That's not what we're. And we were called a supergroup because everybody except me were from previously famous groups. The Small Faces, the Herd, and Spooky Tooth. And when they announced it in the press, it was made for interesting reading because it said Pop Giants Supergroup, which is the last thing we wanted. And that's why we called it Humble Pie. It's like, don't put too much on it. Let's build it from scratch. Don't come out like we're some big shot. But anyway, so it said, Steve Marriott from the Small Faces, and Peter Frampton from the Herd, and Greg Ridley from Spooky Tooth, and Jerry Shirley. Well, huh? Who's this? Hardly someone, but they used the fact that I was still I was just about to turn 17. So they said 16-year-old Jerry Shirley on drums. So that was the sort of made it for interesting reading, I suppose.
So when was it when you look back and say, "Hey, I'm a damn rock star"?
Yeah, somewhere along the way, I never, to be honest, I never looked at myself as a rock star. I looked at myself as a working musician, but I know what you mean. And I think it was the first time I got recognised on the street or at a gig backstage, like when we did our first tour. There was still a lot of young girls coming to see the band that used to scream at the Small Faces and Heard, and they'd seen me on television with our first single. And I remember walking out of the dressing rooms to go to where the men's room were, and all these girls see me and they go, start running at me. And I'm looking around going, what are they screaming at? You know, and I realised they're coming at me. So I made a quick exit. And but some of them, and I remember standing at the bus stop with my mates in North London waiting to catch a bus. And by this time I was getting paid good money for being in the band, and I was getting some nice clothes, and I've been on television, and someone recognised me, and I could. It's the first time that was the very first time I actually got clocked. You know, got look, that's the guy from Humble Pie. You know, doesn't happen anymore.
So with you had
thankfully.
You had two super people there. You had, besides yourself, I mean, you had Peter Frampton and you had Steve.
Yeah.
Now, that worked for a while, but then when conflict started.
Steve was the nicest guy in the world and the biggest asshole you'd ever met. When if he liked you and you were his buddy, everything was fine. But if he was a child actor, and he'd been to a theatrical school, a very famous place in London, and he'd been in Oliver, the musical.
Oh, wow.
when he was 13 and 12, 13, he'd been in movies. So he'd had an unusual upbringing himself, and he could be the classic moody, screaming at people, rock star type person. But that wasn't really him most of the time. Most of the time, he was a very nice, great guy to play with and work with. But if he was pissed off, he'd let you know it. And if it was it was one of those, it was my way or the highway type of things. Now, Peter is that way, is my way or the highway, but in a completely different way. He's very genteel about the way he does things, and he was back then, and he still is, bless his heart. I mean, he's one of my dearest, closest friends to this day. But he and Steve, after a while, Steve wasn't bothered by Peter. He used to make fun of him being a little prissy every now and then. Prissy is what I tried to say. And then Peter would admit to that, I think, if you asked him, because he's not that way now, but he is a control freak. And so he has got to have things the way he wants them, or it's not right. And once we'd gotten our first success and we got to the live album, and we'd had a couple of excellent albums out there that did reasonably well, but hadn't blown the world apart until the live album. When we got there, he'd had enough. He wanted to go and do what he originally wanted to do, which was have his own band. If you see what I mean. So he right when we were getting ready to release the live album, an incident happened where we were supposed to rehearse, and Peter, we'd done plenty of rehearsing. We didn't need to rehearse. We could have a day off if we wanted it. But Steve was very committed to working at that time, and Peter wanted to go and see The Who in London. And Steve wanted us to rehearse in the countryside. And Pete said, well, I want a day off to go see The Who. And he said, no, we're rehearsing. You've seen The Who. You don't need this. And that was the final straw for Peter. And our manager came over to London to show us the artwork for the album that was about the live album that was about to come out. Peter looked at it and said, this is great, but I've got to tell you, I'm leaving the band. And our manager's face, I would imagine. So he said, well, you're going to have to, once it sunk in that he was furious, he said, you're going to have to call the boys, call Steve and Jerry and Greg. And so he called Steve, and Steve didn't react well at all. I wasn't pleased, but I understood. And Greg was the same. He wasn't happy, but understood. Steve wasn't happy and didn't understand. He was just, how dare you, can't do that. No, he just flew at him. Called him all the sons of bitches under this, And Peter said later it was very difficult to listen to, but he understood. I think he took it later in life as a compliment that Steve was that upset that he would lose what he saw as his partner in the band, But Peter went his own way, and we found Clem Clempson, who replaced him, and we did very well. So everybody worked out okay.
So when did you realize that, hey, maybe Humble Pie is done?
Fast forward, we had a big success with the first album after Peter left, called Smoking.
Right.
And had a great 2 years with that, and its follow-up called Eat It. The problem with that was there was when it was mastered, there was too much bottom end on it. It should have been remixed. But by that time, Steve was at the controls, and we had our own studio in built in his house. We paid for it, but it was in his house. Bless him. And you could put lots of bottom end on, but the engineer that we worked with said you shouldn't use that much. I found out later he told Steve that you shouldn't put that much low end frequency on it because it won't cut onto vinyl.
Right.
So when we Eat It Out, and the DJ started to play it, in today's world, or not long after this, the record company would have said, no, you've got to go in and remix it. But they didn't do that for some strange reason. Because when you take the bass out, which we did years later, when we did a box set, a vinyl box set, we did remove all this, so it didn't sound like this.
Right.
It sounded clear, and the way it sounded in the studio. But after that, to be honest, cocaine found its way into everybody's life in the music business, and not least of all ours. And it was the beginning of Steve's behavior patterns becoming very strange. And that was sad, because the guy that we used to have as this brother in arms, if you like, had become very weird. And I personally put most of the blame on cocaine and everything that came with it. We were all guilty participants, And by the way, I've been sober for years.
Oh, congratulations.
I mean, on everything, that stuff. It was fun in the beginning, but no one back then realised its ramifications. What it would do when it was used in excess, because it didn't seem to have any immediate ill effect the next day. Like if you'd been doing even harder drugs like heroin or something for several days, you would feel very ill if you stopped doing it. Well, back then, we were told it was a soft drug. Oh dear! It made the personalities change. Mostly Steve, and his marriage broke up, and it just got. And I got to the point, which was a shame, after all the wonderful. I mean, we had some brilliant times on the road, playing to hundreds of thousands of people at a time, some of the biggest audiences at festivals all over America and Europe, and stadiums and coliseums, and just blowing.
Hey,
and then
hey Jerry, I got a little notification saying my time is running out.
Okay.
But this
Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, you're fine. Thank you so much for doing this interview with us. I mean, this is a bucket list for me. And you've been really frank and honest about everything. You're just you're just great, man.
Well, thank you. And why lie when the truth will do?
I tell you. But thank you so much, Jerry, for giving us this moment of your time. And you take care there, Mr. Man.
You're welcome, buddy. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, you take care.
Take it easy.